don't trust you for a free world.
Those poor reporters at the main news networks are upset because they think we don't trust them anymore.
Well, something has changed. That is what journalists across Canada are saying when it comes to their relationship with the public. Tensions have run high during the pandemic, with some claiming the news media is lying about the virus and acting on behalf of the government. Abuse towards reporters and camera crews has become increasingly common, and there's concern the threats and harassment will live on long after COVID-19 is eradicated. CTV's Travis Prasad reports.
How do you guys feel about yourself spreading lies? Those of you watching this, that's fake news. This is government funded.
Journalists have been subject to claims like this before, but during the pandemic, the contempt has erupted.
And the journalist becomes the enemy.
A recent poll by Ipsos found 72% of Canadian journalists have been threatened or harassed in the past year.
Okay, so why are they surprised? Okay, over the last many decades, all the mainstream media outlets are being controlled by the same handful of corporations. And a lot of them have ties to government. This is not news. It's not breaking news. Most people are well aware of this. Over the last 2 years, it's really come to light for a lot of people that didn't want to believe that media was a controlled narrative. Media does not exist, at least mainstream media, does not exist to inform the people. They are corporations for profit, and a lot of them are for the government. Like right here in Canada, we've got the CBC, the state-run broadcaster, basically, and they're completely funded by our tax dollars. All the other mainstream outlets are highly funded by the government. So of course there's going to be spin, there's going to be narratives out there. This is not a secret, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's just reality. But over the last 2 years, it's really opened a lot of people's eyes, because, I mean, I have to be careful what I say on YouTube, because YouTube is just as controlled as mainstream media, as we know, and I can't go into details, but pretty much everyone watching this channel knows about the fact that there are thousands, or tens of thousands, I should be saying, of doctors and virologists and scientists who are speaking out and have been speaking out for the entire pandemic about how we're being had. And they are speaking out against what governments have been doing, against the restrictions, against everything basically, but they are heavily suppressed, deplatformed, thrown off of YouTube, thrown off of Twitter, and never presented to you on your 6 o'clock newscast by the mainstream media. And the media now, journalists now, don't really exist, except for some small alternative media platforms, and of course citizen journalists.
For some, scientific facts about the virus are no longer considered true.
When then journalists are still telling you, we still need to be cautious, this is provincial health advice, you simply don't want to hear that.
You know, back in the day, when the government said something, or a bureaucrat, or anyone, no matter what their label is on TV, it's like if they put a health official label on a bureaucrat, suddenly that they could tell no lies. Like, come on. But back in the day, journalists would ask questions, would question what the government told us, would question what a health official said. They wouldn't just take it at face value just like that. They would dig for the truth. Nowadays, journalists, I don't even like to call them that, are at press conferences with government officials. They just record whatever the government employees say while they're standing at their podium there. They just record whatever the government says and then regurgitate it back to the public as if it was fact, no questions asked. And this is why there's a huge distrust in the media, because how many times in the last 2 years have governments been caught in their own lies? They present one perspective, one side of the story only, and then they try to label anyone who disagrees or speaks out as being a radical fringe conspiracy theorist or whatever the case.
The Canadian Association of Journalists says it is concerned about the rising amount of harassment and threats against the press covering the convoy protests in Ottawa and across the country. Some journalists are taking to Twitter to share their experience of what it's been like. CTV's Evan Solomon says he had a beer can thrown at him. A Canadian press photographer says he was spat on and shoved.
Now, of course, I don't agree with that. Nobody should physically assault, spit on anyone, or anything like that. Of course not. But can you really blame people for being upset?
And in Edmonton, branding has been removed from some CTV vehicles because of safety concerns.
CTV in Edmonton had to remove all their logos off their vehicles because there's so much public distrust of media, and reporters no longer feel safe to be associated with the mainstream news networks that they work for. Just right now with the Russia-Ukraine thing going on, I could spend all day taking clips from every report from all the mainstream news networks, CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News, all of them. They all start with a journalist or a news anchor saying the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. You know, Russia's unprovoked attack. What? How is 20 or 25 years of NATO expanding against its promises, pushing towards Russia's borders against its promises that it would not do so? How is that not provoking Russia? The narrative is so clear. The propaganda is in overdrive by all these mainstream media outlets trying to paint the orange man bad and now vodka man bad and everyone else is innocent. It's unbelievable. Now, the poor Ukrainians stuck in the middle, that's a whole nother story. That's for a whole different video, of course. The idea that what Russia's doing is suddenly unprovoked and out of nowhere, that is a load of crap.
Last week, a local news crew was spat on during a so-called Freedom rally at the Pacific Highway border crossing.
The media covering the Freedom Convoy would put in quotes, they would always say the so-called Freedom Convoy, so-called, in the headlines whenever they're talking about it, as if they're trying to imply that it's not a Freedom Convoy and it's about something else. Like it's unbelievable, the so-called Freedom Convoy. Well, how about we start referring to CTV, CBC, Global, CNN, MSNBC, all of them. How about we start referring to all of you as the so-called media? Because you're a disgrace. You have no integrity and you're a disgrace to actual journalism. So I'm sorry, if you work for CBC or Global or CTV, or if you're in the States, you work for CNN or MSNBC or any of these propaganda networks, I don't feel sorry for you. And you can't be surprised at what's happening. You no longer have journalistic integrity. There is really no free press anymore. And people are sick and tired of you being a mouthpiece for big government and big pharma and not actually looking for the truth.
CBS Health Watch, sponsored by Pfizer. Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer. CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
This weather report brought to you by Pfizer.
Today's countdown to the royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer.
And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer.
Meet the Press Data Download. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This portion of CBS This Morning sponsored by Pfizer.
On how to find the hidden sugars in the American family diet. Sponsored by Pfizer.
And you're not even entertaining or giving any airtime to all the dissenting voices, qualified dissenting voices with legitimate concerns and legitimate opinions. You ignore it all, tell us that this is the fact and everything else is conspiracy theory, and then you wonder why people get upset and they don't trust you anymore. Well, you reap what you sow.